Brandon Wong asks, if you were the president of Mizzou, that's the University of Missouri, how would you have handled the threatened football strike and associated campus unrest? More importantly, do you think this is a trend that will continue indefinitely? Now, we didn't know this when we posted the questions earlier today, because as you may or may not know, our questions for Stratosphere Lounge come from our Facebook page. But I actually shot a trifecta on this yesterday, which didn't post by the time the questions were up there. Scott Ott brought this story, and I got pretty motivated. But since we're here, let me just say a few words about the situation, the University of Missouri situation. Near as I understand it, this is what Scotty reported, but he's extremely thorough. Somebody reported that somebody had yelled the N-word out of a car off campus, and that they were not satisfied with the president's response to this. There were then further reports that someone had smeared a swastika in human excrement against one of the showers or something at the University of Missouri. And in any event, the student justice warriors decided that the president's response was not enthusiastic enough, and then you got all of this stuff where the football players threatened to go on strike and so on. Somebody went on a hunger strike and so on and so on and so on. Now, almost all of this is in the trifecta, but just to recap, some of the things we find later are that the guy who's on the hunger strike was one of the guys who drove 100 and some miles to go to the protests in Ferguson. And as far as the great courage of these modern-day social warriors, the hunger strike lasted 4 days. He went 4 days without eating, at which point he said his body was dissolving and coming apart, and that was the end of his hunger strike. So give you a little bit of the sense of the dedication of these people. And this is an important point, because once you understand how pathetic and weak these people are, the fact that they have this stranglehold over the university is even more ridiculous and even more absurd. But there's a couple things in here that don't sound right. Well, first of all, look, I mean, what is the president of the University of Missouri supposed to do about some yahoo shouting a racial slur from a car that's not even on campus? If it turned out that it was a faculty member who'd made some off-color remarks, or if it was a student or a group of students or something, then you can at least say, maybe the response was slow. But what a president of a university is supposed to do when somebody screams something out a window, whether it's on campus or not, turns out it wasn't even on campus. I'm not exactly sure that that's, something that should have lit his fuse immediately. The guy who did the hunger strike is a known, he's an agitator. That's the word we used to use for these people, is just an agitator. And people are so ginned up now, thanks to President Obama, this Black Lives Matter thing, this idea that black people can't walk down the streets of this country without being assassinated by the police or whatever. So it's a complete inversion of the actual crime statistics, and it's designed to produce what it has produced, which is the SA. It's the stormtroopers. It's you need some muscle on the street if you're going to be a progressive, because God knows they're physically cowards themselves, the intellectual ringleaders, and so are the people in these protests, by the way. And so you need some street muscle, and so that's what Black Lives Matter is. It's a group now that goes and intimidates people and takes over speaking events. I compare them to the SA, the Nazi stormtroopers, quite carefully. The primary job, I'm not talking about the SS. Now, the SS was started out as Hitler's personal protection squad, but the SS was responsible for murdering a bunch of people. The SA were basically just a bunch of hooligans and thugs, and their job was to provide muscle for the National Socialists, and also to disrupt any meetings of anybody who's in opposition to the Nazis. They would just go in and take over the mic and start shouting them down until they shut up. Let me know if any of that sounds familiar. But that's a little digression. There's some other things that don't smell right about this. When here's the thing, it's funny how so many things they don't seem obvious until you come out and say them. But if somebody had scrawled a swastika in human excrement on a shower wall, why don't we have a picture of it? Is it because that nobody in college has any cameras on them? Is that it? I mean, we see these kids shooting 30 bathroom selfies in the course of a given day each, and nobody has a picture of this. Nobody thought to take a picture of this. You don't find that a little odd? I find it pretty odd. The fact that we haven't seen the picture means there is no picture. So I don't know if it happened. And somebody pointed out, it's a subtle point, but I think it's an interesting point. Someone pointed out that if you're a Nazi, you're not going to put a swastika in human excrement. It's like the idea of a Christian putting a cross on a wall in human excrement. I think that's actually an interesting argument. So basically, look, I think the whole thing is ginned up. So what's basically going on? If it turns out, I don't think this university president did anything wrong, but I think he deserves to be fired because of the way he caved in. But if it turns out that he had in fact been negligent or even tardy in getting on top of a racial issue that he had something that he could control about. In other words, a racist staff member or a racist organization on campus or something like that. Then you could at least say there might be grounds for this. But when somebody yells something out of a window, what is he supposed to do? But here's my point, right? Let's just grant the case. Let's say that all these things happen, and let's say that the president was slow in responding. There is a procedure for this, and it's called the law. And if we were to actually follow the law, this guy would then there'd be a hearing or some kind of inquest. They would have evidence. They'd be able to corroborate the evidence. They'd start asking questions about whether these things actually happened. They'd start interviewing witnesses. They'd start to make a case. And this guy would have his due process protection about whether or not he's being railroaded or not. And if it turned out they could find that there was a credible case of him being negligent in regard to this, then you can fire him. That's not what happened. By the way, at racist University of Missouri, the guy who had the hunger strike on account of how racist it was, he went there as an undergrad, then he went away and came back for his graduate studies. Came back to Mordor in order to finish his graduate studies in an environment that's so intimidating that he can't possibly bear it. And my understanding from Scott is that the black population of the University of Missouri is 7%, but that the student body president is not only black, he's also gay. So this hotbed of racism and intolerance has a gay black student body president elected out of 7% of the total student population. It just doesn't wash. And what it is it's just a bunch of people getting lathered up and ginned up and a bunch of thugs and vandals and hooligans basically flexing their little adolescent muscles and pushing the boundaries of what the establishment and the law is going to take. And the answer is they're going to take everything. They're going to take everything. So the actual question was, if you were president of Mizzou, how would you have handled the threatened football strike? I would have handled it like this. You will play that game on Saturday, and if you don't come to practice on Thursday, then we will open up the football team to walk-ons. If you're not in practice by Thursday, we will put in whatever walk-on players want to come in and play football for the University of Missouri that day, and those of you that don't show up for practice, your scholarships are canceled. Your big dreams of your NFL career are canceled. You're done. All right. If you have a legitimate grievance, we will set up an inquiry into this president, and we will have students on a board, and we're going to have everybody's voice is going to be there. We're going to do this in a way. If you actually think there's a genuine grievance, we'll have an actual inquiry, and you can bring your evidence and you can bring your complaints. And if it turns out that he's guilty of things, then he'll be fired according to the law. But you're not going to hold this university hostage. You're not going to hold me hostage. You're not going to hold the students hostage. You're not going to hold anybody hostage. And we don't negotiate with terrorists, because if we do, then we get more terrorists. Everybody knows this. Everybody knows this. It's not hard. But no, we back down once again. You could mark the beginning of the end of American civilization when in the 1960s, the 60s radicals took over Yale University Law Library, I think it was, and basically set fire to it, and the university backed down, and the university said, you guys have a legitimate point. They should have stormed in there with policemen, arrested them, expelled them, and pressed charges. If that had happened, we wouldn't be where we are today. So yeah, I would have told these football players, either show up 2 days before we go, or you're done. Your scholarships are canceled. And that's probably it for most of them. I suppose some of them think, well, I'll go play for another school. The few of you who maybe stand out athletes enough to be able to be recruited into another school have to ask yourself whether or not that's the kind of student athlete they really want at these other schools, and whether they want that that kind of publicity. But there you go. It all comes down from the top. This president, who was promised to be the big racial healer and the guy who was going to get us into a post-racial future, from day one, when the police acted stupidly, I mean that was 2 weeks or months into his presidency, from day one, has injected himself into the racial divide in order to gin up rage and resentment, which is the only reason he can get elected, is to gin up his base. And when he does that, he is opening the wound, America's deepest wounds, for his own personal gain. He's an awful, evil man, and we just need to keep saying it. He divides this country along racial lines for personal political gain. And when I say personal political gain, I don't even mean Democratic political gain, because the Democrats have lost 900 state seats since he came to office. And it's not about it, doing it even for the progressives. It's for him personally. He's an awful, evil man. And all of this stuff can be laid at his door in terms of the racial aspect of it. But ultimately, what we see at Missouri and at this temper tantrum they had at Yale, which was my trifecta for the week, this is the self-esteem movement's chickens coming home to roost, right? This is what happens when people are coddled. Look, when you see these people having strikes over something like this, or you see that Yale student screaming at the top of her lungs, "Why the F did we hire you? Where's a safe space? We want a safe space." It's real simple, folks. What you're seeing now you're seeing the children that you saw on the floor in Walmart or Target or wherever. Those kids that were lying on their backs screaming at the top of their lungs because they couldn't have a toy, and that were being dragged across the floor out the door by their parents, who didn't say anything and who didn't discipline them in any way. Those kids are in college now, and eventually they're going to be in the workplace. Many of them are already in the workplace, and they're behaving exactly the same way. And some companies are bending over backwards for these millennials, and millennials are putting out a bunch of things like, if you want to keep us, here's what you need to do. You need to understand that we need to be valued. You know what? You can just kiss my ass. Get out of here. You're fired. I'll hire a retired guy. I'll hire 3 retired guys if I have to replace you. I'll take somebody with a work ethic and somebody with a sense of gratitude and civility and decency, and I'll promote the daylights out of them. I'll pay them everything I can. Get out of here. And one of the things I said on one of these trifectas, I think it was mine, about the Yale thing is, the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money. What's going to happen? What's going to happen to this generation when they run out of other people's parents? What's going to happen to these infants? This infants who's always gotten the gold star for everything, always had their pictures on the refrigerator, who've always been told they're the best of everything, and they've always gotten a trophy for everything. What's going to happen when these children run out of parents? I mean, seriously, they're being coddled through college. They were coddled throughout their entire lives. They expect to be coddled in business. Sooner or later, they're going to be the oldest people in the society. What are they going to do then? I happen to think they're going to commit suicide in record numbers. I read an article several months ago about, psychiatrists, psychologists now are dealing with 40-year-old women who have nervous breakdowns because they have to do their laundry. And that's the reason they give. They have to do their laundry. They don't know how to do their laundry, or it's a lot of hassle to do the laundry, and they just can't cope. What do you expect? They can't cope with the world because they were never able to cope with losing a baseball game or a soccer game. You learn how to cope with the big problems by starting with the small ones. We talk about this all the time on this show. It's pathetic. And I have to tell you, I've been fighting against this and worried about it and concerned about it. And the reason my hair's on fire, and so many of us are so terrified about the future, is not just because of these looming, magnificently large crises. We got China to worry about, and Russia to worry about, and ISIS to worry about, and the debt to worry about, the economy to worry about. We're getting stupider. We're getting lazier. Everybody knows it. But the thing that's the most alarming about this is that the people who are going to have to face these problems are the most worthless generation in this country's history. I know we have many millennials who watch the show, and you're exempted. I know it's not fair to tar everybody with the same brush. Look, I'm a member of the baby boomer generation. We've probably been maligned more than anybody prior to the millennials, and we probably deserved it. That doesn't mean all of us are that way. But speaking as a generational cohort, it's absolutely pathetic. And they are going to crash and burn. They're so completely weak. And this is why I think there's a real opportunity to outflank them. I think just go right for the 14, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Something else I'd like to do this year and go right at them before they get too much of this and say, you don't have to be one of these crybaby weaklings like your older brothers and sisters. You can have fun. We're all about having fun. We can have fun. You don't have to feel bad about everything. God, I can't stand them. But I guess just to close this, what I was finally saying is, I got to the point where I was worried about it and stuff. Now I just don't care. I just don't care. Glenn Reynolds is right. It is, in fact, as Rumshi One just said, the liberals are committing mass suicide. Their philosophy is imploding on itself. You can see it all the time. They're eating their own young. Liberal professors say they're terrified of their liberal students. They ought to be. They created them. They created these monsters in their own image. So I'm at the point now where it's like, let it go. I don't care. Get your kids out of those schools. Send them to this one, Hillsdale College, or some other school where they have a chance to be reasonably educated, and get them out of there. Because what Glenn Reynolds said, I think, is really spot on, is that this is going to be the new norm for what a Yale education used to be. Used to be, if you went to Yale or Harvard, there was a set of rigorous standards that were applied to that, and obviously there's a lot of exceptions, and I always thought that it was overvalued, but nevertheless, somebody graduates from Harvard or Yale, you could make a presumption that they had a certain amount of ability and rigor and discipline, and the Yale diploma meant something. When Yale is about nothing more than a bunch of grown-up crybabies literally screaming at the top of their lungs in neurotic hysteria because somebody's not protecting their safe space about Halloween costumes, then that's what a Yale University diploma will be like. And then we'll get back to some kind of balance. Who's doing absolutely terrific work on this is a guy who I've met several times. I can't really call him a friend, but I'm an enormous fan of his. It turns out he's a fan of mine, and that's Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe, I think, is the greatest. Mike Rowe's the most American guy I've ever seen. You must know who he is. He's Dirty Jobs and a bunch of other stuff. But Mike Rowe is basically saying, listen, it's not a question of being overeducated. It's just that so many of the great jobs that are out there don't need a college education. And if this is what college is about, you're not talking about sending people to strengthen their minds and to present them with opposing viewpoints. You're talking about sending somebody to college to have them socialized into communist thought and to be not only coddled, but to be completely inflamed with this sense of entitlement and victimology, where minorities are completely enraged all the time, and simple white people are taught to feel nothing but guilty and nothing but shame for either being white or especially being white and male, especially being white and male and Christian. And it's coming down. It's actually kind of fun to watch on some level. It wasn't a catastrophe. When these progressive liberal, like, let's take a 50, 60, 70-year-old white liberal progressive who's in New York City and has been writing about feminism all her life, first, it can't be first, second or third generation feminist, and so proud of it and so proud of their feminist credentials. And then you hear other people saying, you don't get to talk about feminism because of your white privilege. You don't understand what it's like to be a feminist of color. Your opinion is not valid. And you hear them say, you're right. I really shouldn't talk anymore. I need to not have an opinion about this. And you see them eating themselves. And this is what they always do, right? I mean, just look at the history of the Soviet Union. You had all these old Bolsheviks who stood with Lenin, and then one by one, they're taken out and shot. And when they take one of them out to be shot, all of the other old Bolsheviks get together with Stalin and the rest of the executioners and say, no, death, 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 death to Zinoviev, death, death, death to Kamarov. Bukharin's up there saying, death to Zinoviev. Next thing you know, a couple years later, Bukharin's on trial. Bukharin's begging for his life. I stood with Lenin. Yeah, well, you stood with Lenin, and then you sent these other guys who stood with Lenin to your death, and now you're going to get shot in the back of the head in Lubyanka as well. It's what happens when you have a philosophy that's that horrible, destructive, inhuman, entitled, envious, vile, evil. Boom. Yeah. Just watch. The colleges are falling apart. And the people who will survive are, when I say survive, I mean economically survive and prosper, will be the homeschooled kids. It'll be the kids of conservatives, the kids who had a chance to play baseball or football or whatever, and had a chance to lose and had some chances to fail and have a strong family structure and maybe have a moral code or a religious code that gives them comfort and strength in times of adversity. They're just fitter. I'm not going to get into RK because I'll got a little thing. I'm not going to do any RK tonight, but I'll tell you about this interview I did. But basically, it is in fact watching these rabbit people simply devolve, and they are going to lose, and they're going to be working for our kids because our kids are fitter than theirs. They're just better. They're happier. They're smarter. They're more capable. They're tougher, and they're kinder. So there you go.